Well, thank you very much for joining the session here this morning. My name is Terry Schurter, and I'm the Director of Product Strategy for Global 360. We're going to be presenting two parts to our presentation this morning. I'll be going over the 7 steps to process mastery, and then I'll be followed by Mr. Paul Kay, who's the CIO of Univita, with a very, very interesting story about BPM, what I would consider transformational use of BPM that actually creates a dramatic improvement in customer value through simplification of that customer experience that's so critical to delivering value to our customers. So we will go ahead and delve into the 7 steps of process mastery first. And so I like to start off by asking, what really is process? And when I look at process, I understand that people are process. And actually, process is really the sum of all the people that are in it. And when we think about that, there's a lot of different people that are involved in process. And their perspective is actually quite unique. They see process from a very different point of view. So when we really look at it, this is what I would say is what process really is. And I think also it's interesting to note that in this diagram, we've put the customer experience in the middle because everything that we do in our organizations, in our processes, actually ends up creating that customer experience, whether it's good or bad. So to put this into a little bit more perspective, I hope you've enjoyed seeing the poster that we've had around here, the terrace and patio, a very interesting illusion. What I really want you to take away from this is, depending on what your perspective is, you may look at the same thing and see something totally different than someone else that's involved in a process from a different perspective. So from one perspective, it may be a terrace, and from another perspective, it may be a patio. And what we're doing as I go through this part of the presentation is I'm building some background. When we go into the 7 steps, I'll start bringing some of this importance of these perspectives into the 7 steps and how that actually relates to process mastery. So going in a little bit deeper, if we look at some of the individual perspectives in process, we find that it changes dramatically depending on what our role is in the organization. So for example, if I'm a participant, someone who actually does work in a process, like a processor or a data entry person, my focus is very, very specific. I have tasks that I have to do, and that is my perspective of process. Yet, if I'm a supervisor, I may be looking across a number of tasks and even processes. I have a broader perspective of process, and I'm looking at that broader perspective to actually perform my activities. Now, when we move into someone like a process analyst, now we may actually be crossing multiple processes and even departments. So suddenly my view is expanding dramatically. And when we move into someone like a developer, now we've got all these different systems and IT infrastructure that we also have to deal with along with all of these perspectives on process. So depending on who we are and what we do in an organization, fundamentally shapes how we see and understand process. So with that background in place, and I think you'll understand why I did that before too long, we'll move into the 7 steps. So the first step is to understand and embrace your goal. Now, I'd like to say that anytime we go to do any kind of a process improvement or a process project, that we have a motivation. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it, right? Now, what is that motivation? Well, it might be financial return, right? We might be reducing costs or trying to increase revenue. Or it might be a corporate mandate. It could be a problem that we just all know is a significant issue in our organization, and we just need to fix it. Or it could be a customer satisfaction issue. Well, if we know our motivation, and we should definitely take the time to identify what our motivation is, then we can establish a baseline around that. So in the case of financial return, the baseline would be the current cost, perhaps. Or in the case of customer satisfaction, it might be we currently have 100 complaints per month, and that's too many. Once we have that baseline in place, we can now look at our goal and say, what do we really want to accomplish? This will drive everything we do when we move through a process project. So when we think about that, we say, well, if our financial return, if our current cost is X, and we really want to achieve a cost reduction of 30%, then everything we do when we go through that project is going to be driven by, will this help us achieve that 30%? Now, interestingly enough, even when we do all three of these steps, and by the way, most people do not do all three of these steps, guess what we don't do? We typically don't measure the result of our efforts. What happens if we do measure it? Well, one of three things will happen. If we met our goal, we will know we achieved the goal that we set out to achieve. What happens if we don't achieve our goal? Well, then we've learned something about what our expectations were or what our understanding was that was incorrect, and we can adapt that to be able to, the next time we do a project, take that into account and and help us actually achieve the goal the next time through. What happens if we exceeded our goal significantly? Well, that taught us something as well, didn't it? It helped us understand the things that we do that dramatically affect the goals that we have. So that's the first step in becoming a process master. The next one we're going to have a little fun with, and everyone should have a handout of a maze, and you're going to be participating in an activity now. So in this maze that we've given you, take 40 seconds to find the path from start to finish that takes the least number of turns, and make sure you write down your answer. So go ahead and start. 40 seconds. Didn't know you were going to have to work when you came into this session, did you? Okay, stop. So now, for everyone who found a path with 20 turns or less, I want you to stand up right now. Everybody in the room that found a path with 20 or with less than 20 steps, stand up. Great. Okay? Most people are standing up. Stay standing up. Now, if you're under 15 turns for your path, stay standing. Everyone else sit down. Oh, look at this. Looking pretty good. What about 10 turns? Under 10 turns, remain standing. Everyone else sit down. Look at this. This is a good group. What about 5? Everybody that had 5 or less than 5 turns, remain standing. Everyone else sit down. Okay, that took out about half of the group. Okay, so how many of those that are standing had something like this? Oh, we cheated, didn't we? Thank you very much. You can sit down. Did anyone have no turns? I'm sorry? Did you have no turns? Could we have drawn a line directly from start to finish? Of course we could have. We didn't say you couldn't cross lines. So why did we do this? Well, there's a very specific point of why we did this. The reason why we did this is because what we know influences what we think we can do, constraints. So if we know a process very intimately, we know all the complexities of it, or if we do a very, very detailed process, as-is process model. Does anybody do that? Do they create those really detailed process, as-is process models? No? Some shaking heads. Okay. Well, one of the challenges with that is it shapes how we think about process. It often makes it difficult for us to challenge what we actually might be able to do to achieve the goal. Because in the end, I would say that if every process doesn't have an outcome that we want to achieve, then we don't have a good process, or we don't understand our process. Every process should have an outcome, and whatever we can do to get from the start to the finish is the process model that we're really looking for when we seek to improve our processes. So when we give you this maze, your mind automatically goes into that place that says, a maze has rules and I must obey those rules. So most of the people in the room went through the maze, although we had a pretty good sprinkling of those who did my cheat around it, and perhaps one that took the straight line from start to finish. So we really need to think about the constraints that cause us to fail to challenge the assumptions in our processes. So step 2 is to seek simplicity. It is the key to success. Identify white space and eliminate it. And do that by eliminating non-value-added work and by automating tasks wherever possible. Also, don't make people do what software can. If something can be fully automated, we don't need to have people involved in it. It should be fully automated. Don't make people do it. Conversely, don't make software do what people must. People are in our organizations for a reason. They add value that we can't do with software, and where they are adding that value, we need to make sure we enable them to add their contribution into the process. And finally, simplify the user experience. Without this, we are likely to fail. So now, third step, we're going to set the stage around it a little bit, and I've brought in a customer service representative and say, well, what's it really like in the real world of someone that's out there doing the work in a process? And lo and behold, this is a lot of what it's like. The customer's on the phone now. I must respond. The system won't let me do that. Has anyone ever tried to do something as a customer, and you're told, I'm sorry, we can't do that. The system won't let me. Yeah, you've experienced that? Sure, we all have. What am I supposed to do now? All these different things are the real context that these people live in every single day of their lives. So when we think about step 3, we want to think about improving personal productivity. And we do that by designing experiences, not just interfaces. We also work within the user's context. Has anyone ever used a piece of software that you just felt was non-intuitive and it was just really difficult for you to achieve what you wanted to achieve? Yeah, we've all experienced that, right? So what we really want to do is we want to get inside that user's head as much as we can, and within their context, their real world of process, we want to give them the experience that will help them be the most productive possible. We also want to do something that's called, I call practice quality, as defined by Dr. Duran, who was when Dr. Deming and Duran really set the quality movement in Japan back in the 40s. And Duran defined quality as fitness of use as judged by the user. And what that means is if I do something and I do it right every single time, I produce it exactly the same way every single time, and I do it on time every single time, but the next person in line that I give it to, it's not appropriate for their needs, it doesn't have quality. So we need to make sure that when we're doing things in our interfaces with the users and in the process itself, that we're actually allowing people to produce quality for the next person in line, for the next activity in line. Make everything as simple as possible. It's already a complex world enough. We need to make it as simple as possible, but we also need to make everything as flexible as possible. So step 4, we're going to set the stage on that. Again, what's it like in the real world? What happens with processes? Well, unexpected process adjustments are actually the rule more than they are the exception. Has anyone ever experienced having to go around a process because we had a rush order? Sure, that's happened a lot. What about if we had a delivery truck that came in a day early or a day late? I actually know of one example where a truck arrived a day early and they didn't have the paperwork for the truck, so they had to unload the truck in a different warehouse across the street till they received the paperwork the next day. Then they went and loaded the truck back up, brought it back into the regular warehouse, and received it because they couldn't receive any materials unless the paperwork was there first. The process was not able to adapt in real time to the actual demands. What happens if our marketing department puts on a campaign and it's really, really good and we get a 300% increase in sales orders? We may have an overload. How do we process them? Or what happens if the swine flu takes out half of my department for 3 days? How do I respond to that? Or could things break? Is it ever possible that a system is not available, or a printer or a fax machine or anything else that we rely on to get work done just isn't there for us? And we have to do something. So I actually would say that Murphy's Law thrives in process probably more than any other place in the world, which basically says, if anything can go wrong, it will. So step 4 is to orchestrate for real-time demand. And what that means is we have to recognize that ad hoc is the real world of process. No matter how much we'd like to think that it's a nice normal flow that we're going to go through, it's not. There's going to be all kinds of exceptions that people that are actually doing the work have to deal with. Remember, Murphy's Law thrives in work. Don't design in complex orchestration. Do we have any idea why we might not want to do that? Well, if we take all of those exceptions that we know of and we put them into the process model, it becomes extremely complex, difficult to change, and how much do you have to know to be able to navigate some of those business rules? Has anyone tried to make an unusual change to an airline ticket with a U.S. airline and gone into the nightmare of business rules around those systems? Depending on who you get, you may not ever get to the place you want to be because it's so complex, you can't navigate it. So we don't want to design in complex orchestration, along with the fact that no matter what we put into that complex orchestration, something new is going to happen tomorrow that we didn't think of. But we do want to design in flexibility. So step 5, keeping our processes in tune. I think this is a really interesting one because I've run across a lot of folks who do process projects, and it's almost like it's truly that project mentality. Well, a project has a beginning and an end, right? But processes never end. They just keep going and going and going. So when we do an improvement project, that's just the beginning before the process really starts doing the work. So of course we can get process measures to do reactive process tuning, so we can identify if backlogs start to occur or if bottlenecks develop in our processes or there's a sharp rise in processing time. But we can also do some other, what I would call active process tuning. If you use the step 1 and you actually had goals and you achieved a 30% cost reduction in a process, couldn't we monitor that? Sure we could. We could audit it, and through our auditing practice, we'll know how often we need to check it to make sure that we've actually retain that 30% cost reduction. Is 30% cost reduction a significant value to the business? Of course it is. Shouldn't we protect it? Of course we should. But processes will change over time. And there also may be other business KPIs that are linked to our process that we can measure as well. And the third thing, which is kind of just emerging, and we really haven't gotten our minds around this as well as we probably should, but is this idea of proactive process tuning. And basically what this talks about is if some pattern in the work that's being performed changes, we know something's changed around the process. So for example, if normally in a process we have a document-centric process and someone's scanning in a bunch of documents on the first step of the process, and maybe we have 3 documents scanned at the next step in the process on average per week, but that suddenly changes to 35 documents being scanned at the second step. Hasn't something changed in the process? Something that we should look into? So these kind of proactive measures tell us 2 things. They don't tell us what the problem is. They don't tell us what the fix is. They tell us that something has changed in our process, and they tell us where to look to go and see what has actually changed. And we may find that, lo and behold, a scanner isn't functioning at the proper level, and they're having to rescan documents because they're too dark. I couldn't read them. Well, that's doing it twice, right? We wouldn't want to do that. So there's lots of ways that we can actually use proactive measures to keep our processes in tune. Now, step 6 talks about the hierarchy of process transparency. And before I drill into the actual process transparency part of this, I have a little bit of text up there on the left-hand side. It says, relevant information enables process blinking. Has anyone read the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell? Some of us have. Has anyone heard of the term rapid cognition? Okay, well, you live with it every single day of your lives. Rapid cognition is the ability of human beings to take a small set of highly relevant data and make almost instantaneous judgments. And they're almost always more accurate than any type of decision-making process we can go through to actually come to a conclusion. So basically, as you go through your lives and when you see things or when you're presented with certain amounts of information, if it's a small set of highly relevant information, you know the answer. You know exactly what you need to know right at that moment. So when we think about process transparency, we can roll process data up from all the way down at the task level, all the way up through the hierarchy in the organization. But when we do so, we must aggregate and simplify to very succinct, relevant views about what those different people need to see. So, for example, a supervisor is going to need to see a different set of information to manage, to understand how their processes are working across a range of tasks than perhaps a processor who is working in a specific task. At the same time, we can take our KPIs that are driving our business, our core KPIs for our business, and we can actually break those down into elemental components many times. So for example, if we have an SLA with our customers, and we're a loan processing company, and we guarantee to our customers, we will give you an answer on your loan in 24 hours or less. That loan is going to go through a process, isn't it? Possibly several. We could break that down into elemental components and not only give people the insight of perhaps when we first receive the application, it needs to be put into the system in 1 hour or less. That might be one of our elemental components. But at the same time, we can also put the context around it. So we could say, we need to make sure we get all incoming quotes, loan applications, into the system in 1 hour or less so that we can meet our commitment to our customers of processing the applications in 24 hours or less. Now people understand, I need to do this, and this is why. Don't we all want to know why something, when we're asked to do something, don't we want to know why? Sure we do. And then we actually own the outcome as well. So in creating transparency, we need to use the power of rapid cognition. We need to make sure we roll data up to create process-powered transparency and take KPIs down to create personal analytics. Now the seventh step of process mastery stems around the customer experience. And we all understand this far better than perhaps we realize because we're all customers in our daily lives. So in this particular example, you brought this cartoon in, the Rats cartoon. I thought it was really an enjoyable one. It's a story that I really think is phenomenal. Has anyone ever gone to a discount tire store? What was your experience? Was it good? Positive? So-so? Great? If you ask their customers, overall, Discount Tire has some of the most loyal customers in the world, regardless of what market they're in. And they have that for a very simple reason. When the company was started by Bruce T. Hale, he had 6 tires, 4 of which were retreads, and he started his business. And his business was based on a fundamental concept of, I'm here for my customer, I'm going to have good tires at fair prices, and I'm not going to add on any other prices. Now, for those of you who are old enough to remember, the old model was you saw an ad in the newspaper for tires, 4 tires, $99. You went into Sears, or you went into Montgomery Ward, or you went into Goodyear, and as soon as you walked in the door, you're being upsold to the $200 and $300 tire sets, and oh, the valve stems are $5, and the balancing is $6, and so on and so on and so on. And you end up walking out having spent 3 times what you expected to spend because their entire process was driven around upselling the customer. Discount Tire has a completely different perspective. It's all about giving the customer exactly what they want. So they get customers in and out in 30 minutes or less. They always have the tires in stock that they say they're going to have, and they only sell good tires, and they don't charge for extra services. In fact, they fix your flats for free for life. They are, by the way, have become the largest aftermarket tire retailer in the country. That's a pretty big success story. So if we think about it, as customers, it's really not hard for us to map the customer experience. We could identify what that is. We could describe it fairly easily. And certainly we could define what a desired customer experience is, couldn't we? We could do that for our own companies. And if we did that, we could also create some customer KPIs around that, what we want to measure to make sure that we are delivering what we think is the appropriate desired customer experience to our customers. And then we could optimize our processes to deliver on just that. So that's the 7 steps, and of course, at the end of this session, you'll get a free book to go with this. It goes into much more detail on all 7. I can only give you a very short summary. But the last part of my part of the presentation is I want to talk a little bit about what Global 360 is doing in this respect and how I think we're fundamentally changing the entire BPM market. So when I look at it, and coming from an analyst perspective for quite a number of years and looking at what BPM software typically has focused on, is it's typically had a focus on process models, primarily on the development side of the house. But if we think about it, with this affinity diagram that we looked at earlier, all of these people are what really makes a process. And I know one of the surveys that Global 360 did on the last Gartner event found that I believe it was 87% of the people surveyed said that their people who do the work either sometimes or quite frequently go around the process as it is in software now because it's not aligned to what they need to do. Now, do any of us ever go around the process? I think we probably do quite often. I know I've talked to a number of people at this conference already that talked about how they have shadow processes all over their organization. Well, that's because we've designed poor processes. So when as Global 360 moves forward with persona-based BPM, it's really a whole new perspective because what we're doing is we're actually working on developing all of the elements of process that deal with all the people that actually make up process. And just to give you a little snapshot of where we are today, we are currently supporting the first step of process mastery and understanding and embracing your goal through what we call a viewpoint assessment service, which is really a great way to help set those goals and qualify the value, and along with goal management. We also are offering some really great enhancements around builder tools, specifically designed to help builders create those process models faster than ever before. Certainly the most compelling part of our story right now is the work we've been doing on improving personal productivity, those participants in the process. And just to know more about all these things, you should come by and visit our booth and get a lot more detail. I'm just going to go over a real high-level step on each of these, but by creating those user experiences that people can actually immediately grab a hold of. And I like to liken it to the iPhone. Does anyone here, how many iPhone users do we have? How many love their iPhones? Yeah. So the ideal scenario, if we can get there, is when we develop our processes and we deploy them, ideally what we'll do is we'll give every single person in our organization that iPhone experience so that they can immediately be more productive and feel like they don't require a lot of training. I mean, did anybody read their iPhone manual before they use their iPhone? You don't have to, right? Most people, I say, I don't even know if there was one. So that's the place that we're trying to go to when we think about improving personal productivity. Orchestrating for real-time demand, we have a lot of advanced case management capabilities and ad hoc orchestration already built into our products. And for keeping process in tune, we have process intelligence and simulation that can help us a lot in those areas, along with creating transparencies where we've been doing a lot of pioneering work around personal analytics and dashboards that are out of the box. What people need to see to make those rapid cognition decisions at a glance. And then finally, that helps us deliver on the customer experience, because when we optimize all of the experiences of our processes in our organizations, it automatically improves the customer experience. So that's just a snapshot of where we are today. I can tell you that we have many, many initiatives going on to continue this. It's a journey. It's not just a one-stop kind of a thing, but hopefully give you some perspective on what we're doing around these 7 steps to process mastery. And of course, I invite you to come out to the booth if you'd like to learn more.